Good morning, this is Helen from the Cut Flower Patch. Today we're sowing the seeds and corms from our April box. So normally the monthly Cut Flower Patch boxes have 5 packets of seeds in, 5 different cut flower seeds. But this month we've got 3 seeds, which are Campanula, scabiosa and Amaranthus. But then also we have 2 corms, which are anemone and ranunculus. And we've included those just because they're such beautiful, colourful flowers, look fantastic in a vase, and I don't really think a cut flower patch is complete without them. So the technique for planting those is a little bit different to the seeds. So we'll go through that this morning along with how we're going to sow the 3 seeds as well. Okay, so first up we will plant our anemone corms. The first thing you have to do is soak them in water. So I've had these soaking for 2 hours in tepid water. Often the advice that you read about soaking anemone corms is to leave them in water from anywhere to 2 hours to overnight. But one of the problems with anemones is they do rot if they get too damp. So if I've soaked them overnight, I found they haven't worked very well for me. So these are quite small, so I've just soaked them for 2 hours. I tend to set a timer because I can get easily distracted, so I set a timer to remind me to take them out of the water after a couple of hours. Now, often anemones are sown in the autumn along with other sort of spring bulbs, but you can sow them all year round. I wanted to do a quick test actually because I've never sown them in the spring, just to check that everything's okay. So these are some I soaked and then planted about a month ago now, and as you can see they're coming through really well, so I'm optimistic these are going to be good for us. So what I've done is partly filled a 15 cell tray with multi-purpose peat-free compost. You need a slightly bigger cell than the seed trays that we use. You could put them in 9 centimetre pots if you wish, but I've just used I've got this tray. So I filled it with multi-purpose peat-free compost, about 2/3 full, because we're going to actually we need to plant these about 3 centimetres deep. So what we need to do is take our corms. It's hard to know which side up they are. If you look, there is one side that's slightly smoother than another, but sometimes that's quite hard to determine, so it doesn't matter too much if you don't get them in the right way. And then we're going to pop one of those in each of the cells. There's 15 corms in your pack. I thought there was going to be only 10, but the supplier sent more, so I've popped them all into your seed packet so you can get a few extras, which is nice. So once they're all in there, I'm then going to cover these over with compost. As I say, it needs to be about 3 centimetres deep. Look at this lovely tool. Someone sent me this as a birthday present. That's gorgeous. It's handmade. I won't actually do all of this because, as always, it's a bit boring, you watching me fill 15 cells with compost. So when that's all filled up, you want to pop your label in. Always remember the label. And then anemones are quite hardy, so potentially you could leave these in a sheltered warm spot and they should be fine. The slight problem is that it's very cold at the moment, so I am actually going to leave these in the greenhouse with a cover on, but you could put them on the kitchen windowsill for a while. One of the other things with anemone corms is that apparently the mice like them. We live in the city, so we don't have a massive problem with mice, although the cats did bring a couple in last year. But in the main, I don't tend to get my bulbs eaten by mice. But if you do, it might be worth, if you do have a problem with mice, it might be worth covering them over and just taping it until the shoots start to appear. Before I put the cover on, I am going to water these slightly. But again, you need to keep them moist, but have to be really careful not to get them too damp, just because again the corms will rot if you do. So that's our anemones, and now I'll go on to the ranunculus. Okay, so on to our ranunculus. These are little claw-like shape corms. Again, you need to soak these in tepid water before you plant them. I soaked these for 3 hours in this instance, and they've just about doubled in size, so that's about right. Again, some advice says to soak them overnight, but I think that's not necessary and probably a little bit too long. I'm going to put mine into 16cm pots. I'm going to plant 2 corms in each pot. You could just put 1 corm in a 9cm pot, or you could put 3 corms in a slightly bigger pot. I've about 2/3 filled this with multi-purpose peat-free compost. Again, they need to be planted around 3 to 5 centimetres deep. In this instance, we put them claw side down, so they go that way in. So I'm just going to put a couple in the pot and then fill that up with compost. Now, ranunculus aren't quite as hardy as anemones, and because it's really cold at the moment, I'm going to pop these, I'm not going to cover them, I am going to take them inside and pop them on the kitchen windowsill. They might dry out a little bit while they're inside, so do keep an eye on them and water them if they are looking a bit dry, but don't overwater them as always. Pop the label in. I'm going to water that first. I will plant all of the 10 corms from the pack in one go. And it's probably worth doing the same, I would recommend. So that is our ranunculus. So now I'm going to sow the Campanula. That's a beautiful bell-shaped blue flower, which also will press very nicely for those who are interested in pressing flowers too. So what I've done is I filled a 24 cell tray with sieved multi-purpose compost. It is always worth sieving your compost just to get rid of any big lumps, because seeds are so fine, they need to make contact with the compost, and you don't want any sort of big bits of bark or anything getting in the way of them germinating. We need to again depress the compost slightly again to get rid of any air pockets, because we don't want the seeds getting caught in an air pocket. I just tend to use another seed tray to do that. You could use a 40 cell seed tray or old yogurt pots, as long as there's drainage holes in the bottom. That's the most important thing. Now, these Campanula seeds are absolutely tiny, and I really struggle with small seeds. So what I'm going to do in this instance is use a technique that I was shown on my RHS course. I'm currently studying for Practical Horticulture Level 2 at the Botanical Gardens in Birmingham, which is a lovely place to study. So what I've got here is some silver sand. It's horticultural silver sand. And I'm going to pop the seeds into the sand. Would you believe there's about 150 seeds in this packet? You would never know that, but there are. And then just mix that up a little bit. And the reason for doing this is that when you actually put them onto the surface of the compost, you can actually see how you're spreading them, and hopefully you're spreading them quite evenly. It's not essential to have this silver sand. You might not want to invest in it, but because it's a technique I've been shown, I thought it might be quite useful to do that. So when you sprinkle the sand onto the compost, you can, oh, you probably can't see that very well actually, but because it's silver, you do actually get an idea of how you're spreading it, because sometimes when the seeds are so small, it's really, really hard to see them, and you can't work out whether you're spreading them evenly, and you get too many in one patch. So I'm going to do half a cell of Campanula, half a tray of Campanula, then I'm going to put the Amaranthus in the other half. I'm just pressing it down slightly because we want to make sure the seeds make contact with the compost. I haven't done this before, so hopefully it'll work, but as I say, it's not essential. If you're not using the silver sand, just try and spread the seeds evenly across the different trays. There we go. So hopefully I've got a reasonable spread of the sand in those cells. And again, we're not going to cover this with compost because Campanula needs light to germinate, so I'm just going to pop my label in there, and then I'll go on to sowing the Amaranthus. So with the Amaranthus seeds, they are small again, but because they're a different colour to the compost, they're not going to be quite as difficult to sow as the Campanula. Amaranthus is beautiful. It's a really tall flower, and this one's called Coral Fountain, so it's sort of got cascading coral blooms. It's lovely, and apparently that dries very well as well, so I'm going to have a go at drying some of those later in the year. So what we want to do is just sprinkle a few of these into each cell, not too fiddly, which is good. As everyone knows, I don't like small seeds. My hands are cold today as well, so that makes it even more tricky. I'm not going to use them all. I'll keep a few back, and we can have another go of those later in the year if we want to. And then I'm going to cover those very, very lightly with a tiny bit of compost. They don't need a lot at all. If the compost is already quite moist, there's no need to water these. Mine's fairly moist, but I'm just going to give it a very, very fine sprinkling of water. Again, because we don't want to dislodge the seeds, I'm going to be really careful with those. Then I'm going to pop a cover on them. You can put a shower cap plastic bag or one of these propagator lids, and then that's going to go on the kitchen windowsill. And as soon as I see the first signs of germination, the cover will come off, and I'll pop those into the greenhouse. If you don't have a greenhouse, you could put them in a cold frame or a polytunnel. On the Cut Flower Patch website, there is advice about things you can use if you don't have a greenhouse, alternatives to greenhouses. There's lots of low-cost options which all work equally well. Actually, I forgot my label. Pop the label in, then they go off to the kitchen windowsill. So last but not least, we'll sow our scabious. That's a lovely, what they call a pincushion flower. So it's got the head of the shape like a pincushion. And we've got a lovely mixed variety here in terms of colour. So these are quite nice big seeds to sow. So I'm going to put, I think I'll just put one actually in each cell. These are, again, I filled this tray with sieved multi-purpose peat-free compost. You can use seed compost if you've got any, or if you prefer to use seed compost, but I always find multi-purpose compost is absolutely fine. In this instance, I'm going to do a full 24 cell tray of these, but you might not want to sow quite as many. I've sort of sowing some seeds for some friends who also want cut flower patches, so I've got a bit of a production line going on certain seeds. So just press them in so they're making contact with the compost. And when that's complete, pop a little layer of compost over the top. Again, I won't do them all now because you don't want to watch me doing 24 of them. So when they're all covered up, water them lightly, pop your label in, pop a cover on, and again put them on the kitchen windowsill. And as soon as you see the first sign of germination, take the cover off and put them into the greenhouse, so they can, or greenhouse or polytunnel, wherever you put them, to keep them away from the frost. we do that because they need light to germinate. You find if you leave the cover on and leave them inside for too long, they'll start to get a bit leggy because they'll try and search for the light, so they'll start to lean a little bit. Okay, so that's all the seeds and corms sown from our April kit. I look forward to hearing how you're getting on with them. Soon, hopefully, some of these seeds we sowed in January will be able to put outside once the risk of frost has passed. But for now, that's it, and I look forward to seeing you next time.